Mr. Bauman here. Hours 1 through 4 are hopefully hearing this on Thursday, April 30th. Hours 5 and 6 are getting out on Tuesday, May 5th. Hey, people, you got to get your act together a little bit. I got a lot of folks missing assignments. Please go into Schoology, check your grades. Yes, you may have an A, but you might really have a D or an F, or even worse. If your timeline is not done, get that in ASAP, as soon as possible. If you've got other stuff that's missing, go do it. You got a nice long weekend, 4 days off, plus a third day off last week, or this past week where you had a Monday off. Get your stuff caught up. I'm giving you very little work you got to do. Today, you are finding this. Hopefully you clicked on the puzzle piece for today's date. Obviously, that's how you got here. You're going to watch this little video. I'm going to talk through the notes quick, and then you have a very short article to read. It's literally about 5 or 6 sentences, and it gives you most of the answers. The rest you'll get from me. So, with that in mind, let's quickly talk about what happens after World War II. World War II ends, and the Cold War begins. Remember, the Cold War is not an actual war, though. For those of you who didn't know that, the Cold War is between the United States and the Soviet Union, or USSR. Our last unit discussed what communism was. That started in the Soviet Union, or USSR. Unfortunately, it's got a lot of names. Nowadays, it's called Russia. But that Soviet Union, remember, they had set up communist government in Soviet Union, and they also took over all these countries to the right of this dark black line, or to the eastern side of that. There are a bunch of different communist countries that are all part of what's called the Soviet bloc. This all came from 1945, right before the end of the war. The big three, in the middle is Franklin Roosevelt of the United States. To the right is Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. To the left is Winston Churchill from the United Kingdom. They talk about how they're going to deal with Germany once the war is over. They realize they're going to win. Basically, after the Battle of the Bulge, they knew this war was over, but how are they going to rule Germany? Stalin lies. I know you're shocked. A dictator lied, but Stalin lied and said there would be fair and open elections in Poland, and of course that never happens. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the eastern part of Europe or anywhere that's under communist control. Never heard of any communist country that had a fair and open election. Sometimes they'd have an election, but basically was you either vote for the guy who's on the ballot, Stalin, or you get shot or sent to jail. Not exactly a fair or open election. And no one's allowed to run against that person either. Winston Churchill declares that dark black line that surrounds Eastern Europe. He declares that it is an iron curtain that has descended across the continent, basically a dividing line, dividing the two sides, and it's been called the Iron Curtain ever since. It was never a real thing. There's never actually a curtain made of iron. In 1947, Harry Truman writes what's called the Truman Doctrine. This says that he wants Congress to approve $400 million to give to Greece and Turkey to combat communism. The Soviets have been trying to spread communism even further. He also pledges to provide economic and military assistance to any country or any nation that is threatened by communism. The idea is called containment, not to let communism spread any farther than it already has. It's to hold it in place. If you contain something, you keep it where it is now and don't let it spread. Kind of like we're trying to contain the coronavirus right now and not let it spread. Communism was a similar thought at the time. If we can keep it where it is, it won't spread to more and more countries. We also have this thing at the bottom, which will come a little later with the war in Korea we'll talk about in a week or two, the domino theory. The domino theory said that once a country falls to communism, its neighbors will soon follow, and eventually communism will reach America. Every president, from Harry Truman all the way through John F. Kennedy, had that fear, possibly even Lyndon Johnson. So for about 20 years or so, presidents had a concern that communism was going to spread to the United States if we didn't do something about it. And that is why we're going to going to war in places like Korea and Vietnam. The Truman Doctrine provided the basis for the domino theory. Yep, the idea that the USSR was bent on military conquest of the world, and they kind of were. The Soviet Union was trying to spread communism throughout the world. They'll do it in Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America, and even into Central America, just below the United States, but it does not reach the United States. Again, this was called the Cold War because we never fought the Soviets. They fought some people, not us, that we were friends with, and we fought some of their friends, but we never actually fought each other. And that leads us to the Marshall Plan, which, all right, I just got to tell you all about this great political cartoon on the right. That's supposed to be Stalin. It says, can he block it? Can he block the Marshall Plan from helping Europe recover? George Marshall was the U.S. Secretary of State under Truman, and he set up an aid program to rebuild Europe after the war. We gave over $13 billion to Europe to try to rebuild, but the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe declined our money, saying that would be dollar enslavement, that if they took our money, they would be forced to do whatever we say. That may or may not be true, but that was what Stalin told his people and the countries that followed him. So none of them take our money in Eastern Europe, and that's how they all become communist. And you can see the money. France and the United Kingdom get the most because they took a lot of beating from the Germans, but also Italy and some other countries around, as you can see, took some of the money. But again, nothing across that Iron Curtain on this eastern area, on the eastern or right side. We'll get more into this Berlin airlift and blockade next week. But basically, the Soviet Union tries to control the city of Berlin. That was the capital. It was divided down the middle. The eastern side was communist. The western side was not. Basically, the Soviets are going to put a blockade around it to not let any goods get to West Berlin because they're tired of all the East Berliners or East Germans sneaking to West Berlin to freedom. Well, the U.S. and the British set up an airlift in 1948 with supplies. Over 1.5 million tons of supplies were sent, over 200,000 flights, and then finally the Soviet Union lifted the blockade so that trucks could be used again to get things from West Germany here, the yellow part, over to East Germany into East Berlin and that red city. Very weird to have one little city that was half free and unfortunately, that let people in there. And that's why the Berlin Wall was built. East Germany will put up the Berlin Wall, not to stop people from getting in, but to stop them from getting out of East Germany. The problem was people were flooding out of East Germany into West Berlin and then taking flights back to the free world into West Germany. There's a lot of facts there we'll get into at a later time. That also led to what's called NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and that's a group that's going to start because they didn't think Western Europe was safe. That the Soviet Union they thought would keep trying to spread communism, so they start this group called NATO to try to stop the Soviet Union from spreading even further. In this case, all the way into Western Europe, places like West Germany or Austria or Italy and places like that. And the last slide today is about the United Nations. The United Nations was a group that starts, again, to try to keep countries from attacking others, trying to protect small countries, but also they have a lot of other reasons for starting up. In this case, nowadays they try to stop hunger, they try to give education, help with diseases and disaster relief. But originally it was started to settle disputes, conflicts, arguments between countries and trying to stop war from happening. All right, I think that's enough for today. So your job, of course, is to go back into that puzzle piece now that you've watched this, read a short article. Again, this is called The Cold War Begins. And you are going to click on that, answer a whole 10 questions. They're all fill in the blank, easy stuff. I hope you can manage. I hope you're doing great. And I will talk to you later. All right.